So, I'm Not Your Educator came about by being in spaces that are traditionally not black. Let's call it PWIs, or even places that are not on school campuses where you're interacting with a majority of people who are not black, maybe other people of color, or strictly white people. In those circumstances, whenever the situation calls for it, you're often going to find yourself talking about race, racial justice, something around those lines. And I found in my experience that if I am in those spaces, and let's say I'm one of the few people of color, black people, who are inhabiting those spaces, the default often turns to me to explain myself, to justify, to coddle, or to explain ideas and thoughts of racial justice to people who think they might have it, or those who are strictly against what they think they know. So I'm basically saying white liberals or even conservatives of any race. So in those situations, the burden often comes onto the person of color to defend what it is that's happening in that society at the time. And I feel like that's incorrect. Not only am I not your educator, I'm not your coddler, I am not your teacher, I'm not your encyclopedia, I'm none of those things. So to turn and look at the black person in the room and to ask them, number one, to explain, or number two, to justify, number three, to be the voice for all black people is strictly incorrect and absolutely offensive. I tell you how this came about. So, a night out in Ann Arbor, I think you guys know I'm at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor studying for my master's degree. I'm out with a few friends. A black friend of mine who's also of Guyanese heritage, and his friends. And they had all just graduated from the law school. Most of them were white. And we ended up discussing ideas around police reform, gun rights, things of that nature. How we got there, very interesting. We're getting ready to leave, and the guy turns to me and starts talking about police. And he says, I know you have had a bad experience with police. Now, knock on wood, I have not. But you've assumed, based on my skin color, that I have had negative interactions with the police. Now, don't get me wrong. I've had family members, friends who have had terrible experiences with police. I know the current state of affairs in the world. I know what's going on in this country. However, to look at someone and to judge them based on the color of their skin again, and to assume based on that, that person fits into the stereotype or the story is an assumption, but also slightly racist. And I had to explain this to him. At the end of the conversation, I mentioned to him that it should not be my job nor duty to do that. However, because I was in that situation, I felt the need to explain that. Where does the burden lie? I took it upon myself. I decided that I wanted to talk about that, but at the same time, folks should know better, especially white liberal folks graduating from a top law school, top 14 law school in the country. And I want to clarify that this does not only apply to white people. This has happened before in spaces where people of color still assume the same thing. I've had experiences in places like New Jersey with a few friends of mine, people I do consider my friends, who are just sometimes oblivious. I've even found myself saying things like, to somebody who is not white, you are not white. Why do I have to say that? If I could carry a video camera around with me, you'd see. I tell you, situations like those are very painful. When you are dealing with people who you know come from a background of color, whose people's heritages that's even a word, cultures have been subjected to the racism of Western society, and then they can turn around and say things like, I don't know why, but after I graduated from middle school, all of a sudden the folks who I was around started to look at me and label me like I was white, when before I would be called insert expletive. It's confusing, but it's also kind of maddening to really think about that. In this pursuit of understanding this and understanding how far I've gotten into these societies, I also have to wonder about myself. How is it that I've gotten this far? Why is it now that things are changing? And what am I coming to recognize and realize? When you've been granted opportunities to study at these universities and to go to places where people who look like you are not often seen, then you have a chance to interact with people who probably would not have chosen you as a friend if they saw you off the street. Why things have changed for me? It's because I realize and know who I am, coming to know who I am, coming to know where I've come from, the people I've come from, the situations I've come from, and to recognize that my background is vastly different to many others. And some people may never even have the experience to understand what I'm saying or to live it, essentially. But if I can tell it and discuss it and to let folks know what it's like, then maybe they'll be prepared when they get here. Because it's not your job nor your duty to explain this. There are universities set up for this. There are colleges, schools, books, websites, videos. There's so much information available for people to actually sit down and learn about racial injustice, institutional racism, prejudice, just all of it, that there is no need for someone to feel like you should be the spokesperson, representative, or educator on these topics. If you're going to engage in these topics, it's important for you to come with a knowledge bank, come with some actual effort, and not the shit you hear on television, not the shit you saw your most liberal friend on Twitter retweet. Actually put some effort in to thinking about these topics, what they mean, and what they mean on a macro level and also on a micro level. Micro when you're discussing this with friends and people you consider your contemporaries in these spaces. I say all this to say, please be careful. Black people, people who find themselves in these spaces, that you don't take on the unnecessary burden of feeling like the educator, the teacher, the life coach, if you will, because it's not your job nor your responsibility. You've lived it many times over. Even if you are even if your social class transcends the norm, even if you come from the bottom of the barrel, but you found your way somewhere else, it's not your job to teach them. They know what it is. That willful ignorance and that infallible opinion can be broken, but only if you choose not to give in to it. Thank you.